Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Gonna give it just another second or two and let registrants kind of filter into the room. So hang on just a sec, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Let's rock, indeed. All right, I think we're good to go. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. My name is Michael White. I'm a librarian and the adult programming coordinator at the Glenview Public Library. And on behalf of our partners at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library and the Northbrook Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. 33 1/3, Mike McGonigal on My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. Thank you for being here, and we're really happy that you're here. So tonight is the 12th, the final program in a series of 33 1/3 programs that we started back in June of last year. 12 months, 12 albums, a different album each month, a new author talking about their 33 1/3 book and its classic essential album. It's been an amazing ride, and our deepest gratitude and thanks to all the authors who have jumped on with us and shared their love of music and the stories behind it this past year. We started last June with Aaron Cohen talking about Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace. Our thanks to Bloomsbury, 33 1/3. And if you didn't know before tonight, 33 1/3 is a series of short books about popular music, each book focusing on an iconic individual album that occupies a specific place in music history. Hosting these programs and meeting these authors each month the past year, talking about music has been a real joy for us. It's meant a lot to us. And we think that music and these stories behind it are an integral part of the connective tissue between libraries and our communities. And so we hope to continue to do more programming like this in the future. So if you're a music fan like us, please stay tuned to what libraries are doing in your neighborhood, in our neighborhood. Consider joining us for future events. All right, so let's rock. So it's my true pleasure tonight to welcome Mike McGonigal. Mike lives in Hazel Park, Michigan, and his next book is going to be called Walk Around Heaven All Day, A Sinner's Guide to Gospel Music. It's forthcoming on MCD FSG in 2024. And while his other book, Temperature Rising, an Oral History of Galaxy 500, maybe there's a program there too, will be reprinted by Exact Change any day now. McGonagall has edited 3 fanzines in his life, and in the interest of transparency, Mike's an old pal, and these fanzines were really important to me in my own musical journey here. Chemical Imbalance from 1984 to 2005, amazing mag. YETI from 2000 to 2014. And for the last few years, for Third Man, he's been the editor of the full-color quarterly magazine, Maggot Brain, also known as the best music mag in the land, at least in my house. So the 9th issue of Maggot Brain is out next month with a lovely Pettibone cover image. He also hosts a weekly gospel show called Buked and Scorn every Sunday on XRAY FM in Portland and CJAM in Windsor, Detroit. So now, Mike, I'm honored to welcome you and to talk about some My Bloody Valentine, Loveless, and rock a little bit. So welcome.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. This is Maggot Brain. This is the last 2 ones. And really excited to have the support of the Third Man people to make something just really nice, because I could never afford to do that myself. Also, it's great to do something where like I don't have stacks of them in my living room. And then what we're here to talk about today is this little guy. And I think from what I heard and what I've seen of the talks that have already happened, mine's going to be a little different. And I think that'll be quickly apparent. So this is an actually groundbreaking record that we're talking about, and I'm going to talk about the process and my own experiences of it with the band. So on the off chance you don't have 33 and the third books, like I said, they're small in format. Most are around like 20,000 words or so, and they're basically modeled after different European and university press books that were about each about an individual film. And this was a great idea because it's like about one just one work, and giving writers who generally were because music writing was a lot when this started. It was still something that like more than 5 people could make an actual living on, and generally most music writers had deadlines that are based around just release dates and stuff. So it gives you this chance to really dive into one work, which otherwise the only way you can maybe do that is like in liner notes or something like that. Like I've been able to do that a couple times, Stereolab and Codeine and stuff myself. But this obviously is a lot more detailed. The book was published, so it's been a little weird, and I went today and wrote a bunch down, which is mostly what I'm working from, because the book was published 15 years ago and written over the course of 2 years before that. And at that time, the band hadn't released another new album, so Loveless itself was already 15 years old. Initially, my book was to be written by someone who honestly was better suited than me, but he dropped out. I forget why. So my book was late before I even got started on it. And initially, in talking to the 33 and a third people, to this editor, David Barker, I picked albums that were already taken or just too obscure. And then I didn't pitch Loveless because it already said at the start of the books that were out, because it listed upcoming ones, that this guy David Keenan was already writing it, and he'd been in this band, the Shop Assistants, that I like a lot. And then since all that, he's become like one of the most interesting novelists too. So this record sounded so unlike anything else at the time of its release that my experience probably mirrored a lot of people's, where I took my brand new CD of it, and yes, I had a CD, I didn't get the vinyl, but I took it around to different friends' apartments to play it on their stereos and boomboxes, and a lot of it was people in bands. And I remember even taking it to Kramer, the guy who recorded Galaxy 500 and other bands, and I was friendly with at the time because I wanted to hear it on studio speakers. Because each time I felt like I was hearing different information. And Kramer was like, "I'm busy, go away, kid," but at least I tried. Loveless really sounded different at the time, and it sounded different on the stereos because a lot of the information was in the middle and lower registers, and it just sounded like this at first, like this crazy soup of sound. And we had some sense of this is maybe gonna like sound different, because these EPs that led up to it were really weird and beautiful. And my friends and I, who were lucky enough to have already seen them, because they did tour the US at the start of 1989, also had a sense of how totally powerful they were live. So here, finally, 3 years later, and this was like it was like White Light, White Heat and Pet Sounds at the same time. And we were immediately talking about it that way. It's really hard to write about this and even talk about it, because it's just difficult not to slip into, this kind of talk of, just the fanboy language, and also even the most like rockist among my friends encountering it were, we'd been exposed to like the music where we were living in New York City, in that area, like what we had heard just leaving the house, whether it's D-Light, who are big in the East Village, or Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, just really typical stuff that appealed to our burgeoning like dad rock sensibilities. It was clear that this was also music that was made at the same time with some of the same tools, and it was really clear that it was super contemporary, and that it could have only have happened now. I want to quote a bit from something that I didn't include in my book, but that also I feel like is just contextualizing it for us. And of course, if I were British and had been, seeing them for years up until this or whatever, I would have had that experience. But I'm not, and I didn't. But so this is John Perellis, and he was writing a little later, right when they were touring behind Loveless, and John Perellis for decades has been one of the best writers on popular music, but I feel like he doesn't get, like, I feel like he's like hiding in plain sight. He never named a genre, and isn't like doesn't have outlandish like sort of ideas, but he's great at describing music and knows it so well. I remember once at a winter music conference in Miami, and he's just offhandedly said something like, "Oh, and of course the 37 rhythms of Brazilian music," and I'm just like, "What?" Like, so. He was here. He's just. I'm gonna go into this a little bit. He's just explaining to New York Times readers at the time. So he said, in England, My Bloody Valentine is a pioneer of what is sometimes called dream pop. And he mentions Jesus and Mary Chain and Sonic Youth and Husker Du, and then newer bands, including Swerve Driver. That veiled, slightly mysterious songs can draw listeners in, but My Bloody Valentine remains more radical and more disorienting than the bands it's influenced. Which is really smart to be saying that, like right after the record was released, and parts of Loveless managed to sound as if the CD itself had been warped, which is something else that I've heard continually since this. That people are just when they're hearing it the very first time. In an age of digital clarity, My Bloody Valentine might be the revenge of the analog, which is. But here is a good quote from Kevin Shields, the founder, guitarist, songwriter of the band. What we're doing is not really a reaction against modern times. It's just that people got obsessed with the idea of separation to make music sound really sparkling and clear, he said. And then again, continuing to quote from Perellis, and not my own book, but from this fancy New York Times on February 28th, 1992, before the band played at the Ritz and destroyed all our eardrums that day. He wrote that the music uses the best technology we can get our hands on, including digital samplers, to manipulate sounds like strings and flutes. And that's really important because we know there's no strings and flutes on the record. And I don't know necessarily that when he was writing it, he was saying that, but it sounded like it, but we know that it wasn't. Um, and and then this is another great bit from Shields from this. It's a product of the times, but it's not dependent on the times, he added. About 75% of the music could have been done at any time between 1960 and now. People have this idea that it's layers and layers of guitars to make one big sound, but it's actually just one or two, perhaps three or four at a peak. And there aren't lots of overdubs. It could have been even while Perlis is writing these words, if one's to assume he wrote it a day or two before the Ritz show. I was backstage in New Jersey at City Gardens, this giant concrete bunker of a venue infamous for its brutal hardcore shows. And it's showing a review from my fanzine, Chemical Imbalance, to Kevin Shields that my friend David Bowman, who later for decades was a photo editor at the Times, wrote in the latest issue of Chemical Imbalance about their 1990 Glider EP. Now, at the time, of course, information got out a lot more slowly. My zine was once or twice a year at best, and we would often be writing about things like a year later. So I'm showing him this because I thought it was beautifully written. Bowman had described their way of recording this amazing ambient, sort of ethereal, swooshing, woozy, but huge sound as one of primarily erasure, how they spent many hours layering sounds, then peeling them back. That's how we understood the music. And Kevin loved it because it was really well written, but it was entirely wrong. It's so wrong, it's perfect, he told me. So it took me a few years to finish my little book, even though it's so small. And I have to tell you, I had the worst time doing this. I hate how I did it and that I did it. And in retrospect, I wrote my book at absolutely the wrong time in terms of the band's history and the group's willingness to talk. I fear I was also unable at the time to really do it justice, and wasn't critical enough, nor did I fully exploit the benefits of having briefly been friends with them. And in the end, we weren't friendly at all. In fact, just like in the movies, this book was actually stopped. Production changes had to be made to the book after film and plates had already been made, which is so embarrassing. They actually stopped the presses. I don't think I've told anyone that. I'm not sure if series editor David Barker ever did either. So the band had the publisher insert this little sort of placard at the start of the book, and it says, no other 33 1/3 starts like this. Although the members of My Bloody Valentine submitted to interviews for this book, which is like, oh my God, you're submitting to interviews for this book. Um, and all the quotes from those interviews contained herein are reasonably correct. This is in no way an official My Bloody Valentine book. And the views expressed, except indirect quotes, belong to the author and not the band. So I had that experience. Thankfully, like, to be honest, there's way worse books in the series. So even though mine's not great, like, it still sits in the middle. And I'm gonna see if the participants click away now. But there's like such amazing books in the series, from Jen Pelly on the Raincoats, and Drew on Throbbing Gristle, and Eric Davis on Zeppelin, and Gita on Eno, and Michael and Jill Matos on Prince. I forget who did the De La Soul 3 Feet High, but that one's really good too. And as mentioned before, the Aretha book rules. It's a great series of books, and I'm proud to be part of it. So I'm going to quickly run through their history and get up to Loveless now. I think a lot of people, unless they're super fans, are not really aware of how they started. Obviously, they have this ridiculous name from a B movie, and they started as this gun club birthday party cramp sounding retro psychobilly type band. So from the beginning, You have Kevin Shields, of course, the main person in the band, the guitarist and later singer. Always superhuman drummer Colin O'Kasich. And they started with this vocalist on David Conway, and there's even a bit of keyboards on what we're going to hear, this woman, Tina Durkin. And Kevin played on what we're going to hear. He plays both bass and guitar, and he wasn't singing yet. Bassist Debbie Gooch did start pretty soon after what we're hearing. So I'm going to now try to do this smoothly and well. So this is how they started. I like it a lot more now than I used to. Like that just sounds like a really fun, like what a fun way to start a band, right? But certainly it's really different from how they wound up, and it doesn't sound like a band that's going to influence hundreds and freak people out and convince labels to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds. Um, with that original singer David, they did also get janglier and much better, and towards just like a genre that was kind of adjacent to that, and certainly of its era, a little bit more of its era, because while that's 85, that could also have been 82, right? So that's that's crucial to me, because they're gonna become this and making this amazing future whale sex music, and so we're gonna hear a track soon from this Sunny Sunday Smile record. Um, so here in '87, when they make this change, they're catching up more with this international pop underground noisy guitars and poppy bass lines sound that is just really exciting. And in a lot of places, it's some of the most exciting music happening then. So many wonderful acts, Soup Dragons, McTell's, Pastels, Shop Assistants, Tallulah Gosh. Most of the bands on the Enemy's promotional C86 cassette from the previous year. I myself was a huge fan of that stuff while it was happening. I did interviews through the actual mail with shop assistants and television personalities from my parents' house in Miami. I was lucky myself to live near one record store in South Florida that would order records on labels like Creation and Subway based on coverage in the three British music weeklies, who were notorious for being so on top of things that, they might say a release is God's gift one week and a month later trash the band for being trendy, when they're the ones who made them that. It's great fun to follow along with that stuff from afar. And when I finally traveled to the UK myself in 1990, I made sure to visit my favorite writer, Simon Reynolds from Melody Maker, who was one of the biggest contemporary champions of My Bloody Valentine and is a great writer. So that was 1987. And in recent interviews, Kevin Shields really counts the start of the band with after Belinda Butcher joins on guitar and vocals, because that frees him up to sing and play guitar along with her, which is a big change. and their harmonizing was kind of simple and on the surface much closer to the sort of body ba vocals of late 60s fluff pop acts like the Association generally derided at the time as like popcorn cloud vocalizations. They also at the same time got a lot harder in their sound, and the bendy parts that the Jaguar guitar famously employed with its whammy bar by Jay Mascis of Dinosaur Jr. were added a lot more, but they also loved the sugary wall of sound of Husker Du and the detuned minimalist punk assault of Sonic Youth, if you allow me to be very reductive, but we all know all this stuff anyway. But you know, Sonic Youth is at their peak in you know 86, 87, and often in the UK, thanks in part to their European label Blast First, and same for Dinosaur Jr. So while at the start, My Bloody Valentine were hugely influenced by American bands, then we hear that switch to being really influenced by the Jesus and Mary chain, like everybody was. They would, you know, talk about one trick that was worthy of being one trick. Like their first couple singles just blew everybody's mind, and really helped jumpstart a lot of stuff. And then they go back to being primarily influenced by this new crop of current great American bands. And then, you know, soon enough, the band themselves has people just copying from them from all over the world. So then here a year later, we have the You Made Me Realize EP. And this is, for me, when they really are their own band. And their foregrounding elements other bands wouldn't think to. Their lyrics are hilarious and perfectly kind of edgy, transgressive, like a Dennis Cooper novel, you know, multiple songs about suicide, and but with this like coated in sugar sound on top of it. And what we notice with the vocals are starting to fade even more into the background, and it's so it's stunning and hard hitting at the same time. And here we'll see, man, they're so young and cute and smart, and they're already by 88 they're already as good, if not better, than their influences. So they're playing the song live, and they start to extend it and extend it at the end. And I had described it from when I first saw them do it, because as sticking your head inside of a jet engine, like it really felt like that. And you know, I'd seen loud bands. I'd seen people play so loud that you couldn't hear them, but so something different was happening here. And by the time I saw them, they'd mastered the art of it. They really know what they were doing. They turned the monitor speakers around to face the crowd. And what happened was that we were catching these overtones floating on top of the noise. Near as I can make it out, the words are something like, "What did you say you'd find? Then come, 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 get the hell inside. You can close your eyes. Well, you might as well commit suicide. Don't hate me because I don't hate you. Insane eyes, you made me realize." So this is not a band you listen to because you love their lyrics. And later with Loveless, you can barely understand any of them anyway. But you know, that's great too. It's like it should show you that this is like that this is fun. I think. And at one point doing this book, um, I researched experiments supposedly conducted during World War II by the British Army into the efficacy of sound as an instrument of war. And I learned that sonic cannons had apparently been constructed at some point and, of course, tested on Army personnel. Throbbing Gristle had done a lot of research into that too. I mean, you'd be surprised to learn if Throbbing Gristle hadn't done research into that. Um, but yeah, while I was pummeled by those sounds, I did wonder if there was something like that in it. Um, After about 5 minutes of the noise part, it changed, and this is a common part of it, and it can't be captured uh, on microphones. So you just have to take our word for it, or you have to see them. And of course, they're back now. They're in oldies act. You can see them, but you start to it becomes much more melodic, and you hear these sounds on top of it, and it's a little bit like those weird bird sort of sounds in Metal Machine music. In 2004, Shields did talk at length about it, and he said usually people would experience a type of sensory deprivation, lose sense of time. It would force them to be in the moment, and since people don't usually get to experience that, there'd be a sense of elation. And he says that people would tell him, wow, that was really weird. I don't know what happened, but suddenly I heard this symphony. And he said that that was what the whole purpose became. When I spoke with him about it and about the melodies that I was hearing, he kind of snapped over the phone that there was no melody. Every melody everyone had was in their head. The group played all the strings on the bass at the same time, and then me with this whammy pedal, able to go 2 octaves lower and then bring it up and down like that. And then with various distortion pedals, I could change the texture of the noise whenever I wanted. So it wasn't just like one sound, it was sort of moving along somehow. And he told me it was the best part of the night always. And each night it was an experiment to see how long it would take for the audience to turn from one state to another. A certain percent of the audience would start sticking their fingers up at us, or they would put their hands up in the air with their eyes closed or do something like that. And he told me I pretty much would always go on as long as it took to change the audience. For me, that was pretty close to as much that music was like an altered state without other stuff. And later, Sacred Harp singing or Lamont Young big band or whatever would kind of do that. But that was the time that it had the most malevolence and focus. So now we're up to where the band is mastered this. In terms of recording, they've made the best sort of loud, harsh stuff that they ever could. And after signing to Creation, and the record, of course, isn't anything. And that record's recorded in 3 separate studios. And wow, it's amazing. The drums sound like a machine, but aren't. The woozy guitars really take over. The vocals are just flat out weird, and no one else sounds like them. We could try one more time with a video, and then if it doesn't work, we'll just continue without them. Do you want to try?
I got it all hooked up, Mike. Let me know like immediately or chat. Let me know if it's not coming through and I'll just stop it. Otherwise, I think I may have figured it out. Fingers crossed. So 1 sec.
Yeah, so it's the soft as snow but warm inside one.
Gotcha. Okay, here we go.
Um, yeah, no one sounded like that. um, the first time I saw them was at the start of 1989, and half the show we watched from outside because Jay Mascis was at the controls. Uh, there wasn't a window at the venue, but we could totally go outside and hear it. We just wanted to be able to hear the next week, if not the next day. Um, and then later, when I saw them, at one point I was friendly with them, and I drove them in my '72 Cutlass Supreme back to my apartment because we were like partying, hanging out, and they wound up crashing there. And I really felt like even though we were doing some stuff, like I was so much more disoriented from the sound from this band. And so this is the My Bloody Valentine that others ape. For the next 3 decades, it's still possible to both the way they sounded on this record, and then how they were live until they disbanded in this first iteration from 1985 to 1993. The band was restless and in love with invention, and they never stayed at the same place for too long. And so each record is in truth just radically different from what came before. So by the early 90s, they were firmly in the future of mixing sampler technology with rock elements in a way no one else had or would for years. But live, they would continue in this way to be just loud and heavy because they loved it. And the next record, Loveless, is just completely different. And if you would please play only Shallow from the beginning, please. Thank you so much. That one sounded great. So now we finally are arriving at Loveless, and it's released in November '91. And remember, Isn't Anything, the previous long player, is in '88. So, and obviously, as you can hear, you can't rip that off. I mean, for one thing, there aren't actual drums on it. At the time, the band was still super broke and spending all available money from the record label creation in the studio. They were still living in squats, and drummer Colum took ill during the sessions. So they to deal with that, Kevin Shields, all the drum sounds are created painstakingly from samples of his playing. And that would be hard to do now, probably, but it's incredibly difficult to do with the highly technical and not user-friendly low bit rate samplers of the time. Like, one thing to remember about this record is no matter who's credited, including the drums, Kevin's playing almost all of it. He's playing all the bass parts, all the guitar parts. It's basically Kevin Shields' solo album with his friends hanging out. Belinda obviously is singing her parts, but another thing is that often the highest pitched vocals are usually Kevin's and Belinda's the lower. When I wrote my book, hardly any of that was known. The simple fact the record is basically in mono was a near secret, and it's fun to test that. There's very little information about the band. The chief fact was their failure to arrive at a follow-up to what many considered the greatest record of the '90s. Like, that was the chief thing about them at the time. I did talk to Kevin. I didn't get to talk to Colin for the book, even though I'd probably been friendliest with him at the time. When I talk about my own relationship with the band, it's basically as just like a guy who showed up at shows and we talked about collaborating on some stuff with my fanzine that never happened. Like, I in no way was actually like friends with them. It was just friendly, and that's pretty crucial. I think because I had this sort of fanboy thing, like it. I think I had my wires a little bit crossed. I did have brief phone conversations with vocalist and guitarist Belinda Butcher and bassist Debbie, as well as Kevin. I talked to all different people who worked on the record. Again, it was just a weird time. Like, it seemed to me like both Debbie and Belinda at the time weren't even really sure what they could say, and I think they'd been told that the band was going to get back together still. But none of that had happened yet, and it kept not happening, and that was just my take on it. And they weren't unhappy, just honestly, that it just seemed like, oh, this was a great thing that happened, and it ended at the time. And I personally was really excited about that, in that here was a band that had kept getting better and better, and then they stopped. So there's this Bartleby Effect book about writers who stopped writing, and it's kind of a romantic idea. Like, one of my favorite writers, Robert Walser, infamously checked himself into same asylum as Adolf Wolfley, and he told his writer friend Carl Seeling, like, "I'm not here to write, I'm here to be mad." Which, come on, of course you're gonna like. That's pretty great. And I'm also just fascinated with great one-offs, like these 78s that we have by people where there's only one 78, like Luther Magby's Soul 78 from 1927 is one of my favorite things. If there were a lot more material, I don't know, I would feel the same way. Or Skip Spence's Or, while we have these extra tracks from it that have since been released, like, still just one record that's amazing, right? So that's where I thought we were with Loveless when I was writing my book. This band that went from like little fake werewolves to these great geniuses of digital pioneers of future music, so much to me of what I focus on now is the band's just sexual presence is so strong. The stuff is so weirdly sensual, unlike other bands, and I think that had a little bit to do, at least, with that they had gender parity at a time when hardly any indie bands did. I think more in the UK than US, but I don't know. And I love now that you can't understand a lot of the words, because then you kind of are making them up yourself. That's just my personal experience of it. I do tell my understanding of why it took so long to make this record in the book, I think, pretty well. Backstage on that Loveless tour in '92, Colin swore up and down to me that a major reason the record had taken so long was because the band were having chicken eating contests in the studio. Now, later I finally realized he's probably fucking with me, and that's not what happened. But I love that idea. Debbie Googe, in an email to me, said, "I would never deliberately dispel myths. They're generally much more interesting than reality." Which, what a great, I mean, that could be a tattoo. No, it couldn't. Anyway, But I was miffed when she wrote that to me because I forget what it was, but I really wanted an actual answer. Loveless was made in so many different studios is the thing, close to 20 studios for one record. The only folks credited with production are Colin and Kevin, but the number of engineers and assistants listed are like 17 people. Some of them are pretty well known now, like Guy Fixon, who I spoke to. It's said that the record nearly bankrupted creation because it cost so much to make. Shields contends that if they just set things up right and spent some money up front, it would have cost way less if they just were into the proper studio that he wanted. So on that, there's so many myths and half truths around that I don't know. It would take someone digging into the, forensically into the receipts to figure that out. And, I've talked to some people who picture, Kevin just working the whole time. And there's others who say, if it wasn't without engineer Alan Mulder's helping hand, it would have been a total mess. Here we get to the part that relates to the message that they put at the start of the book. So after reading an earlier draft of my chapter on how it got made, Kevin got really mad. And he said, "You're referring to this," that he's writing, I'm quoting him now, "You're referring to this previous book by this guy, David Kavanaugh, too much, which is called The Creation Record Story, My Magpie Eyes Are Hungry for the Prize." You know what happened to that book after it was released? He wrote, "It just died." So much of it was incorrect. And the weird thing is the whole thing was simply such a bore. It's more an accountant's version of events. And as he hardly talked to anyone in the vans on creation, there's so many great stories he missed, he said, but he didn't tell me any of them. And then it's weird. He ended with the guy who wrote it just disappeared after that book. You don't see his byline anywhere today. He was completely disgraced. So yeah, that was a weird interaction. And here I was just trying to get facts straight with him. Later, when he insisted certain facts be corrected, the one that most stands out is I wrote about the time after Loveless when Island Records set them up with their own studio inside their own house to make what was to be this great drum and bass infused sequel to Loveless, which of course was never released. So my crime was I'd written that Kevin and Belinda had as many as 20 chinchillas, but in fact, Kevin said it couldn't have been more than 14. So my favorite story about it from an acquaintance who unfortunately asked to be anonymous, so of course I'll still honor that, who just was working on the sessions. And dude swears that one day the engineers swapped Kevin's purple mic poppers, those round, thin things that hang in the air in front of the mic, catching spit or whatever, with black ones. That's all they did, is they put black, purple mic poppers instead of purple mic poppers. And supposedly he went ballistic and swore up and down that the purple ones sound better, which is also just kind of awesome. Like, I respect that. And if you heard that about Prince, you'd just be like, oh, it's so cool. The best anecdote, I think, about Kevin Shields that helps explain him, to me at least, comes from his sister Anne Marie, and how as a child, he would sit in the middle of the kitchen and appear to hum while passing his fingers in front of his face with one hand and then play with his eardrum with the other hand. And just a kid, he's entranced with modulation, with the way that sounds disintegrate and spring back to life, how different frequencies seem to cancel each other out, but don't quite do that. They create something else entirely. And that's the sound of Loveless. It's just setting that up and making it happen. And no one else could do it. it's really simple. And that's also, I think, a lot of Kevin's like annoyance with people, is like they just can't get how a lot of what he has done is just set this one thing in motion, and that's all. And it's not like it's a trick or something. It's his own world. And whether he's making new music or not, whether we get to hear it or not, because today it's 11 years since the last record, right? The very surprising MBV double album from 2013. So, you know, he's clearly just such a visionary. And you know, my only problem with personally with Loveless is that I've only been able to listen to it rarely because like I'd sort of burnt out on it, which I hate. Like it's hard for me to hear. So thanks for coming to my TED talk on how to not do one of these. Let's if we can, let's do that last clip. It's just a crowd in Texas, and it's more You Made Me Realize on the Loveless tour. Let's just hear a minute or two of that. And again, we're not hearing what they're hearing, but it's still pretty cool.
Neil, yeah, if you can play that, and then Mike, we've got a couple questions from the audience. Thankfully, we can play. Okay, well, that was an appropriate way to end the sonic world we were in. So let me queue up a couple. So folks, sorry about the technical stuff. You think after doing 11 of these, we'd have this sorted out on our end, but we didn't. So it's all good. And thank you for being here. And Mike, I appreciate you being here so much. So I'm going to start off. Christina has a question from Dan. Technology aside, do you feel that this record could be made today? In other words, do you feel like the mindset, the access, the time, and the manner of recording, mixing, producing, nearly inducing bankruptcy, which you've alluded to, combined with the headspace of the participants playing a primary role in the formulation of sounds, what role did these pressures play in the sound product? In the end, were compromises made?
I think, well, there's always compromises. That's anytime you make art with more than one person, especially. I think that record labels don't exist at all the way that they did then, so it's really hard to transpose it that way. I think that you couldn't even find that many small studios to have to go to work in even in a city like London now too. That's one thing that technology has erased. I think that we all have way more ability to create things just on our laptops now, so much more. So And in terms of whether you could make it now, I mean, there's always amazing music being made, and there's always the ability for someone to use the new tools and push something. I don't know what an analog to that would be. I don't know what is similar to, you know, the then very new technology that was primarily being used, of course, by dance and hip hop producers. But I'm sure it's there. And yeah, I mean, any great work of art should just totally just inspire us, even if something like this, and here I've listened to it so much and it's still can sound completely new. So that's just, to me, that's just like endlessly inspiring, you know. My own personal problems on not having done the best book I could have done aside, like this is the one of the most amazing, inspiring records. And I think setting the one thing about influences that I see a lot of people fail at is well, the most basic like rock example is like Sam Cooke wanted to be you know, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, Sam Cooke wanted to be R.H. Harris, who was the other singer in the Soul Stirrers, and to him, he never even reached that level, even though to us, it's just like, oh my God, he's the most amazing singer. Rod Stewart wanted to be Sam Cooke, and they wound up being Rod Stewart, and that's pretty great. Then you get to the Black Crowes, who were fine, but they wanted to be Rod Stewart, and if they'd wanted to be Sam Cooke, maybe they would have wound up there, but like they didn't even know, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, why not latch on to one of the most amazing things and try to be that, rather than try to sound like, you know, the thousands of bands or musicians now who have taken influence from this. And that was a bit of an aside. Sorry.
No problem. So Thomas asks, what can you share about Alan McGee and Creation Records and his, and then it trails off. So I'm assuming maybe his role in this record or being made or something.
Unfortunately, I didn't get much. I didn't get any time myself with McGee, which was really a bummer. I did talk to Ed Ball, who had been in early bands on Creation and was a really important part of Creation. So McGee, you know, was huge, and him signing them was so great. But they never saw eye to eye on finances, and at the time, like McGee was like kind of a con man trying to run his thing, and you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep the label running and all that. So that's why this record is made in 20 different studios, because he would run out of the ability to pay the studio, and Kevin being so particular, like he would be able to hear like a little buzz that nobody else would be able to hear. And it could be that it's as sort of bullshit to us as the Purple Mike Popper, that really he's just causing trouble or whatever. But if we hear this music and agree that this is genius level music, then why not go along with the fact that, oh, that studio that seemed just fine to everybody else was in fact not for him. And so that's another like 20,000 pounds for that week down, just because to McGee it was sounding like Princess and the Pea bullshit, and he's having to now come up with more money and wait longer. I mean, he's waiting years for this. It's really easy to see both sides to me now of this. And also in my experience, just my tiny experience of having him have my book stopped because I said the wrong number of fucking chinchillas. Like, who is this guy? But
Yeah.
also, if someone's telling his story and they're getting it wrong even a little bit, there's also a side to that. In my experience, of course, is nothing like uh, a label that had given Kevin Shields money, but I would not want to be a label that gave Kevin Shields money, even though he's made one of my favorite records.
Gotcha. Okay. We're going to keep going with a few more questions. We realize, I want to recognize that we've gone over 8 o'clock. And so if you guys can hang out with us, Mike, if you're okay with hanging out with us, we're just going to, this is our last one, man. We've done 12 of these, our last one. We're just going to go a little bit long. This one goes up a little bit
That's
longer.
cool.
So, okay.
I think
So
my thing went longer than I thought it would too. So
yeah.
sorry.
We're all fans, so we're here. So I just Jim says, I'm proud that Loveless is an album both my 35-year-old son and I love, but I don't remember how I discovered it outside a magazine heralded it. How did the album achieve its status with so little exposure via radio or video play?
It was just so in my little world of already being a fan of this kind of music and going to these kind of shows, it was immediately just huge. It was the best, biggest thing. Like I said, it was our whatever, like 5 of those 60s best records ever that we see on the cover of Mojo and Rolling Stone, like all at once. It did get big reviews in Rolling Stone. Everything was a rave in the New York Times and everything. It was definitely in tops in the Village Voice Paz and Jop poll, which again in my world is a big deal, or was at the time. Probably not, beyond that, not so big. So but they also had gotten onto. I didn't mention it, but they gotten onto the Creation had made the deal with Sire Warner Brothers, which of course would soon lead to Oasis being the band that definitely didn't bankrupt the label that would be the engine for them, selling millions. So because it was on Sire Warner Brothers, I definitely remember seeing a lot of in record stores, seeing the big cover slicks that are big size, which of course we'd all love to have one of those. So it wasn't like it wasn't indie at the time, and we didn't have the same machinations that we have now to push different things out, but it was one of the lucky few that did get to be out there. And then of course in time it just always kept selling.
Gotcha.
So I think it did do really well, if for being a bit of a niche thing. And then of course we have in the same year we have Nevermind happening, and even though this is 8 months before Nevermind, it could still also follow those coattails.
All right. Thank you for that. I've got I want to go 2 more questions. Okay, folks, and then we'll thank Mike and we'll go on with our evening. So was Belinda Butcher's ex really a threat to Kevin and Belinda? Did it overshadow the production of Loveless? Sorry to ask a dark question.
This is something I only know second or third hand about, so I feel like I can't really talk about. But I know that there was some real bad vibes and bad juju there. But probably just like online, you're gonna find like better information or something, than what I know. Because again, I know some stuff, but I don't feel like I know it because I didn't bring that up with either of them.
Okay.
So I don't feel like I can say that. Just like there's some stuff that I know that's just more personally that I don't feel like I can say too, you know.
Makes sense. Yep, I understand. Thanks for that. Okay, I'm going to combine two questions and tag them together, and then that's going to be it, and we'll say goodnight. Thanks again to everyone for being here. Thank you. It's been a lot to me personally that you agreed to do this. So, is there a line through Phil Spector and Kevin Shields? Part one, and then the second part is unrelated, but it is, if there was one more record that you could write about for 33 and a third, if you had like maybe a mulligan or whatever, is there another record that you would do?
Sure. Definitely there's I know that Kevin, what he knows music, history really well. I in fact had sort of like burgeoning interest in what is generally called guitar evangelists like Blind Willie Johnson when I was first talking to him, and he was like, oh, really interested in that, which is, weird proto-gospel music from like 1928. Yes, he totally knows about Spector, and then both of them have walls of sound for sure. I mean, there's no other way to describe the opening minute of this record as a fucking wall of sound. You have to sit down. When you're first hearing this record, it completely hits you over the head. It's also sugary sweet and like a pillow, but you don't know that, you are first hearing this record is like being turned around and dunked in a tropical fish tank. Like, you're disoriented, there's pretty things, you don't know what they are, you don't know where you are, and it can still have that. So that definitely, is related to Spector. Thankfully, Shields, also a erratic genius, we'll call him. Thankfully, as far as I know, he is not a murderous, misogynist fuck. And then in terms of another 33 and a third, well, I'm now starting into writing about the history of both Black and white gospel, partly because that's like really interesting to me. That's never been done, like going from before they existed onto now. So it probably would be a gospel record, but if in terms of more what they cover, initially I did also ask to write about Astro Weeks by Van Morrison. For many reasons now, I'm so glad I that wasn't accepted. Also, just like what Van Morrison has become is just so dreadful. So I want to actually give an answer to that, and I think it would be something that I love and don't know anything about, like a Terry Riley, like Poppy No Good, or Rainbow and Curved Air, or well, I guess In C is probably the one that it would be. So I think it would be Terry Riley's In C, because that would really be stretching my own musical vocabulary and understanding, and be about something that is great. And also, I don't think now that I would do it in a way that at the end Terry Riley would hate me, because I really wouldn't want that.
All right. Well, that's perfect, Mike. Thanks again so much. We appreciate you hanging out with us, spending a little bit extra time. Sorry about the technical stuff. But yeah, thanks, Mike. Everyone who came tonight, thank you so much. Keep an eye on what your local library's doing. Keep an eye on what your libraries in your neighborhood are doing, because we're doing really cool stuff. People like Mike say yes when we ask them to come on a Zoom and talk about a book. So things are good. Stay tuned for more stuff, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Thank you for coming. Have a great night.